Your name's not down, you're not coming in.
Hello, this is Raw. My name's Tom Latcham. I'm your host. We started this whole podcast because the 90s rave scene seemed so poorly documented due to it happening underground and pre-internet and, of course, pre-camera phones. But today's guest was one of the few people who did huge amounts to document the decade of rave. As one of a handful of rave photographers in the 1990s, Eddie Oakshare became the eyes of the era, and he captured jungle and drum and bass from the inside. His new book, which he's co-authored, is called Who Say Reload. It's an oral history of the records that define jungle and drum and bass, straight from the artists, including Goldie, Hype, Ronnie Size, Andy C, and many more, and includes loads of Eddie's wicked photos. Is out now, and it explores this. And he joins us now for a natter and a bit of a reminisce. Hello, mate. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, sir. Very well indeed, Raw. Very well indeed, Tom. I mean, thank you for the invitation and the chance to discuss and talk about the new book, Who Say Reload, which is out on Velocity Press.
Well done. You got the plug in the early doors.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, there's going to be loads of those, mate. Don't you worry about it. So tell me, what was it like being right in the heart of the 90s rave scene, but not as an artist or a promoter or like any of the other people that we've had previously on this podcast?
Yeah. I mean, as a punter, it was a wonderful moment to go out and essentially lose your mind. I think certainly coming out of the 80s and the 90s, I think clubbing had become quite straightforward in its own way. I would have been sort of in 1990, I would have been 16 years old. I think I made attempts to get into clubs and didn't make it in because they wouldn't let you in for whatever reasons. And the rave scene kind of meant that I skipped clubbing in traditional bars or places that essentially are pickup spots and went straight into the fields and the squatted buildings and danced all night long in places where there were no bars and there was no alcohol. And as such, it was a much more beautiful and human experience because you weren't sort of picking up the bodies off the floor kind of thing. People may have had bad trips, but your job, if someone has a bad trip, is to put your arm around them, tell them everything's going to be okay, give them a bottle of water, and explain to them that, hey, guess what? We can go to Ibiza this summer. And that's where we grew up. That's where we founded ourselves. Years later, I think I ended up in some town, what's it called? Birmingham. And there was a street in Birmingham where every Friday and Saturday night, people would be herded in to get drunk and go to super pubs and drink and basically fall out and get in a cab. And I realized how grateful I was to have had a rave experience that wasn't based around drinking, police, cabs, vomiting, and ending up in a kebab shop at 4 a.m.
But your experience as well, not as a punter, but as a photographer, must have been very different to everyone else. Because I suppose, I don't know, you got to stay sober at that point, because otherwise you ain't going to get the shot. And you're viewing it in a different way to both the artists and then the punters on the other side of the decks.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, I'll go in there with a camera, and I think the first time I shot a rave was probably the Laserdrome, and I very quickly realized that you can't stay sober. You have to be in the same character as everyone else in the building, and that meant enjoying the toxic chemicals that were being made in Amsterdam at the time, and shipped into England for our experimental use. And you had to then, and so from that sort of first instinct, I had a particular lens and a camera, and I realized it was all wrong. You couldn't go in there with a journalistic camera or journalistic mind. So I had to get I bought a camera called a Canon EOS 10 with a wide angle 28mm to 19 to 20 mil lens. So wide angle, fully autofocused, in a way that, because the human eye can't work in the dark. That's just a fact. Whereas a Canon camera with an infrared focusing beam on it would do wonders in a rave, because as you press the shutter on the camera, it sends out this beam, this infrared beam that would sort of go out. And people thought it was like lasers or strobes or something. So it just meant I could shoot in the dark in a rave when everyone's off their face without them feeling paranoid that there's some kind of, or there's a camera in here, or someone's watching me while I smoke my crack. No, I'm not interested in what you're smoking. I just simply want to put you and everyone else in context, because this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. All of us, young, beautiful, different races, dancing.
And you,
Mind
you,
blowing.
you, of course, operated pre-internet, pre-camera phone.
Yeah.
How did you then, and how do you now view your role in that 90s rave scene?
I kind of feel like my role is like other photographers in London, like Charlie Phillips, Neil Kenlock, different photographers who would photograph their communities. Neil grew up in Brixton, so he photographed the Brixton community during the riots, before the riots, and all the activism that was in Brixton at the time. Charlie Phillips grew up in Notting Hill, West London, and he documented the shebeens, the pubs, the culture of Notting Hill of that time. And I kind of felt like I'm in that league where I'm documenting my time, but my time isn't based around one particular village or one particular part of London. It's a culture, it's a way of life, it's the rave. I missed out on the sort of post 88 and pre 92 raving experience where you'd have to sort of go to Burger King on Tottenham Court Road and get on a coach. I missed all that. And the magic of all those things, the magic of just trying to go out and dance without the law being on your case, was one of the most romantic things I ever imagined. And I wished I was there, but when it did finally emerge in the cities of urban London, like, you know, different clubs and so on, or different urban spaces, then I knew I had to sort of document this, because even though I didn't go to the raves, I had mates who were DJs who would be mixing up their hip hop with their ragga and all the other bleeps and hardcore, and you just felt like everyone was so. As a young people, everyone was so cool. Like, there was no issues, there were no problems, there was no alcohol. It was a different sort of way of socializing, which was kind of intriguing for me, because like once you started going to the workplace, and on a Friday night, everyone go out and have bevies and pints. I'd been so cultured in rave and everything else. I was like, right, I want to go out and dance. I don't want to be in a pub gassing. I don't want to drink. I want to dance. I want to rave. I want to dabble in chemicals that are now used for psychotherapy. Don't say the word.
We know what you mean.
Yeah.
Psychotherapeutic experimentation.
Yeah, exactly. Psychotherapeutic.
We got there together eventually.
We did, didn't we?
And the journey isn't important. The destination is what matters. In terms of the book, Who Say Reload, of course, on Velocity Press. There we go. Do it again. You provided the photography. What is the story? What story does your photography in the book tell, in your view?
I mean, the story is just really giving you. The stories are really, in one sense, Paul has sort of like coaxed the histories on the moments of making key tunes that we would all know. But I was also, quickly after hearing the tune and buying the tune, I would then find the artist and photograph them and almost get into their heads to understand where they were coming from. And it just reinforced the fact that we all came from the same sort of mindset, really. There's this consciousness that emerged at the time. So my stories are to simply portray and contextualize these individuals and their creativity. And there's two characters in the book that I never photographed at the time, which was Shut Up and Dance and Nookie. But because they're still to this day making great music and still doing great things, I didn't feel like I'd missed out on capturing them at their peak or within the midst of their creativity. In fact, Nookie's new album is as good as his best album. And that's going to drop anytime soon, I think, on the Metalheads label. I'm not sure. But it just reminded me how the spirit to create and that desire has to be recorded and celebrated, because so many of us were just talked out of it from our sort of, going into school and saying, sir, when I grow up, I want to become a world-renowned producer and be number one on Top of the Pops. And they just get laughed out the room. But you deserved it. But they all did it and they all proved themselves. And for me, for Shut Up and Dance, it was a pilgrimage, because I do remember vividly watching Top of the Pops and seeing them perform I'm Raving, and thinking, we've made it. We're here now. We're like, it's here. Like we're with the nation listening to what we're saying, and everyone's raving. Obviously, it got shut down a week later and was discontinued, and they were sued for every penny they had. But still a great record. I had to buy it on 7-inch recently. It's just a beautiful, beautiful tune.
The vibe I get from your book and your photography in the book is that uh, it's all about living for the weekend, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
and it's starting with getting your dubs cut on a Friday ahead of the weekend. You know, the weekend going out raving all weekend, and on a Friday it would be about the music house, the cutting house, the social center of Jungle.
Yeah, that's very much the case. I mean, I would go down there and cut my own dubs, and Leon, rest in peace, God bless his soul, would always be quite, never judgmental about what the tunes were. But I think if you were lucky enough to get to know him and he came to respect your sound, he would very much champion you. You'd say, look, I think Grooverider should cut this, and that would then stay in the studio. So when Grooverider came in to cut his plates, it would be played to him, and he'll be like, okay, yeah, that could work. That could work this Saturday. And many of the shots you'll see, or a few of the shots, certainly the Grooverider rewind shot that I have, because the cover of the book has Goldie and the Metalheads sticking his hand out, losing his mind because Grooverider just dropped the tune. In the second shot after that, you'll see it's a dub plate that was probably cut 2 days earlier on the Friday at Music House, probably tested out at some rave on Saturday, just to be sort of like, to find itself being heard for the third time on the Sunday. And that culture really was so, it's like a boiling pot, it was constantly sort of like boiling up new tunes. And on the Sunday, especially in the Metalheads, it would be filled with producers and artists, as well as ravers and dancers. And they themselves would then go home that night, because you'd be back home by midnight, and just make another tune in the hope that you'd make it onto the Friday run and continue that cycle of creativity.
Amazing. So most of our audience won't have a clue what it was like in there when they were, the Dub Fridays. So can you paint us a picture of what it was like, just on a typical Friday in there?
You try and get to Music House as early as you can, because if you got there, because it was a first come first serve basis, there was no appointment system. So you basically walk down to this alleyway off Holloway Road, walk into a room, like a waiting room, almost like purgatory, a bit like hell. And then you'd sort of count how many heads are there. And then you might ask who's next and how many people are going. And you'd be like, there were 4 or 5 people. And, it takes around 20 to 30 minutes to sort of cut a dub, depending on how much work Leon needed to do to the track. And so you'd sit and wait and wait and wait. And then maybe if you're really unlucky, Jar Shucker walks in. And if that happens, he's going to be cutting plates for the next 12 hours. So then suddenly your 1 hour wait time is now gone to 13 hours. So you just wait, and then you wait, and then maybe Grooverider will walk in, and then you're like, right. So then you get pushed back behind the queue because you're a nobody and Grooverider's just walked in. So there was always a pecking order. But your ear was always there to hear what was being cut, because it was always cut at loud volume. There was no sort of sound insulation. I think there was a toilet, but it was literally a shed with a cistern and some. Anyway, fortunately, you could smoke outside in the alleyway. But by the time you reach like 4 o'clock, your weed had run out. You may have to switch to bevies, and you were.
But if Grooverider's turned up, then think everything's okay, right?
It's all right. You're hoping you can sort of like can I cut you an extra plate, or don't forget each plate costs £35 to cut. So on a Saturday night, you'd have 70 quid on you between you and your mate, and you'd have one side, he'd have another side, and then you'd have to sort of swap the dub plates around and lend them out to your mates, because you want to get them played. You want your tune to be out there and played. And then maybe after 4 or 5 hours in Music House, you finally hear your tune and think, actually, it's not that good. I've just heard the most tearing drum and bass of all time around me.
I mean, that could be quite a soul-destroying experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's back to the drawing board again. Right. I'll relegate this one.
And then your book sort of goes on to sort of feature. You've done the Friday, you've got the dubs, then you're going out and you're dancing and you're partying the whole weekend long. It captures a lot of the joy of dancing and also about the venues and that sort of stuff. So it's sort of it tells the whole story about the week, but focused around the weekend.
Yeah, there's definitely that, because that's when the tunes would be finally sort of put to test. And so many of the producers in the book would talk about the making of the tune, and then the first time they heard it played out, or the first time someone said, "Oh, your tune was played yesterday," and it went off. There was like 5 rewinds on it, and you're like, and you're in that, and you're in their emotional moment, thinking, God, that must have felt great. That must have felt great, knowing that your tune, this random thing you made, you had no idea whether or not it's going to relate to people or not because it had the weirdest samples, and it does. People love it. And those stories are really, really powerful because you get to realize how everyone kind of experienced the same thing in their own way, in their own environments, whether you're from Bristol and you're cutting Warhead and you're crust, or whether you're sort of like Chrome and Time who are from sort of North London, because we were so much more regional then. The villages that we came from, whether it was Brixton or Finsbury Park, kind of made us. The record shops and the culture of those areas would determine the kind of music that we'd have. So if you're from Wolverhampton or, you know, all the different sort of regions that were producing music were kind of reflecting their own cultures in a way, DJSS from Leicester and so on. Well, Leicester, Milton Keynes, but their sound was almost like a reflection of Milton Keynes. I don't know what the sound of Milton Keynes is right now. I'll be very curious.
I bet it's quite quiet. I mean, everywhere's quite quiet at the moment.
yeah, no one's saying anything or doing anything.
But venues as well, didn't they? They played such a crucial role in that exploding jungle scene around about that time. Which ones stood out for you as both a raver and a photographer? Not necessarily for positive reasons.
I mean, it's interesting because I had a great time at the Laserdrome, but I would probably be very young and used to the idea of a rave that looked like an adventure playground. You know, it was kind of dangerous in its own weird way because it was a former Quasar place, and Quasar was like laser tagging.
Yeah.
It was meant to look like a post-apocalyptic alien spaceship, and then they must have lost their license and suddenly it became a rave. But the police wouldn't give them any alcohol licenses, so all you could buy was Ribenas, but it'd still kick off in there. And that was kind of interesting because when you read the book, many people talk about how dark and dangerous Laserdrome was. And it wasn't dark or dangerous to me. It was just very Peckham. It reflected the people of Peckham. No one would travel from anywhere to go to Laserdrome. And if you did, I think they sort of sensed that you weren't from Peckham and they sort of troubled you for it. But being a Brixton lad, you know Peckham's just a shithole, really. And whatever, still is. No, but the point is politics. And I think what's beautiful about the book is that it really explained the politics of the venues, particularly because each venue had its own nuance, security, promoters, some more lackadaisical about certain drugs than others, you know, and that sort of tempered the mood of the space. You know, if you got it right, it was a great night. If you got it really wrong, it was a terrible night. And so those venues it was beautiful to read the stories about the Laserdromes, the AWOLs, the Ministry of Sounds, the Roller Express. Because for me also as a young lad, sort of having to go to a mate's house who then have to borrow his mum's car without her permission to then drive to these really weird parts of London for us, just so we could dance all night long, was a really beautiful thing because they weren't your average spaces. They weren't the sort of experience you'd have now where this, you know, security, coat checks, bars. It was a completely different, all those things happened, but they were very different. And obviously we tried hard to get on the guest list so we didn't have to queue up like the plebs and it goes on and on and on. But those venues really made us. Those were our playgrounds. That's the magic of what happens when young people dance after midnight, when they do their own world after midnight. This beautiful thing occurs.
Well, we hope you're enjoying today's episode of Raw, but now's where we ask you inevitably for your help to keep this project rolling on. We're a tight-knit team of 4 working part-time for free, taking no wages out of this project to create this podcast, and it's quite a serious undertaking alongside our normal day jobs. Hopefully you can see from our progression from audio to video in the few months since we started this podcast that, thanks to your ongoing donations, we've managed to improve our equipment. And I'm pleased to say your generosity means this podcast now washes its own face in terms of costs, which is absolutely great news. And thank you so much to any of you who've donated. We've got big plans for the future, but we aren't going to be able to do it without your support. So if you want us to keep making Raw, you're going to need to keep on funding Raw, and that will help with the cost of renting or buying recording kit and paying expenses to travel the country and interview more of your favourite rave artists from the 90s. So if you can spare anything at all, no matter how big or how small, you can do so at gofundme.com/the 90s rave podcast. That URL again is gofundme.com/the 90s rave podcast. And if you're not in a position to donate, because we know it's a tough time for everybody, you can instead help by subscribing and sharing our content on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. You just need to search for Raw, the 90s rave podcast. Go and do that now, please. Massive love and respect to each and every one of you. Hope you're enjoying it. You saw a lot of beautiful things, but you will have also seen a lot of horrible things as well, because there was some dodgy times. Were you ever nervous yourself, or did your background mean that you were like hardened to that, or it wasn't an issue for you? Because I know a lot of people do speak about that.
Yeah, I think I was hardened to it, and also I kind of knew when to jump ship. You knew when because there was a sort of turning point from happy hardcore to becoming darkcore, you know. And to be fair, I hated happy hardcore. It was way too grinny and way too amphetamine based for my liking. So when it went dark and moody, and yes, there may have been the smell of crack in the air, and that's what I was told it was. I just assumed it was like the strawberry smoke machines, because I didn't know what crack smelled like. But that moodiness did change a lot, and the sense of camaraderie, and you know, in the traditional raves. All right, so if someone steps on your trainers circa the early 1990s, that would probably be a death sentence. Whereas when you went to the raves, if you stepped on your trainers, it was like, no worries, mate, all love, get a hug. So I think what it was that we went from such a loving, all-encompassing humanist environment to then darkness. And then that darkness forced a load of people out, and only the sort of strong lads sort of survived. Years, obviously, by the time we got to the mid-90s or the late 90s, a lot of raves were so male-dominated because it just became more testosterone filled, you know, and the people that had to leave were essentially women. We lost women from our clubs, which changes the mood of the experience that you're dancing in. Yeah, and I did complain about a sausage fest, but that was always my warning sign. If I went to a rave and there was like 60%, 70% blokes and 20-30% women, and all alcohol and bad drugs, you know it's going to be a terrible night.
Well, that must have been quite an interesting change in the makeup and feel of the crowds and the scenes and the raves to photograph.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely intriguing, you know, sort of to go from beautiful women or young women sort of dressed up with like the 90s style outfits to geezers was a bit strange. But as a photographer, I didn't judge it. I just had to sort of photograph it because I knew time would tell. And at the same time, I realized that what happened is the girls had migrated from the drum and bass rave scenes into the garage and house and garage scenes, which had emerged out of the sort of new underground that sort of came out. And you kind of had to sort of go with that and follow that lead and see that there's a continuum of something in our rave culture in England that travels in different forms of music, but that spirit is always the same, that feeling is always the same. And so it was really beautiful to see it go from happy hardcore, jungle, disappear a little bit in DnB, and DnB became its own thing, and then house and garage emerged and brought that back into the fold. And then when house and garage sort of collapsed and went into commercial culture, a new culture came out of that, which was dubstep and grime. So I ended up following the continuum of this creativity, but not necessarily the music, the sound, the BPM, for instance.
The jungle scene exploded at a time as well when the government was criminalizing the rave scene, and racist policing was pretty common. Some people say it still is, but very much so at the time. It was quite clear. Did you try to capture that?
No, because the raves that I would go to were the ones that were smart enough to sort of pay off the police, so they didn't turn up.
Right.
Yeah, because let's be honest, the police, yes, they were racist, but you sort of find a series of things that come with that. Like wherever you find a racist, you always find a sexist. Always. The two are sort of interlinked. And with that, you always find corruption. And a lot of the time, the police, it's never really said, like, yeah, they were racist, but they were also quite corrupt. Like, they were just basically drug dealers. You know, they kind of wanted to pull over kids, take their drugs off them, and sell them back on again. So, and that's never really said enough, because I think it's the criminal element in the police force that really has destroyed or will destroy the police force. You have to sort of weed out the criminals, and that's what we should call them. You know,
did you not think that's changed in the last 25 years?
It's shifted. I think it has changed. I think, yeah, it definitely has changed. But policing, but also, they've kind of succeeded by legitimizing, by making, you know, the licenses in London became a lot more relaxed. It allowed for more sort of a lot of drum and bass, a lot of rave culture actually finally did break into legitimate clubs like Fabric, like The End. So all the super clubs in London eventually adopted our sound and our culture, and as such, they themselves it became more officialized. You know, there was more dialogue between the police and the club owners and so on and so forth, and it became quite interesting for a while. You know, there's been standoffs between clubs like Fabric and the police because for whatever reason they took umbrage with these promoters. Sometimes you have to sort of respect where places like the Ministry of Sound or The End, where they focused hard on making sure that the relationship that they had with the police was always more balanced in a way that would allow people to simply have a good time and feel safe, because that's the whole point. The police, for whatever reasons, are there to make people feel safe, not to feel threatened by them or by the society that wants to prey on young people dancing, you know? So, and again, I think most of it's motivated by our sort of like kind of draconian drug laws, and that's what we need to sort of maybe deal with. But as I said about Birmingham, I feel like it's the breweries that are the real problem. They're the ones that seem to want to maintain their monopoly on the way we socialize, you know, without necessarily considering the effects of what alcohol does to people or to a group of people, because it doesn't make us happier.
No, right.
There's a sweet spot, and then there's a cliff edge. You know,
I mean, it's an incredibly damaging drug, as we know from, you know, in terms of not only, you know, the violence and that follows it around, but also in terms of depression and alcoholism and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
I know in the book you feature a lot about the Metalheads as a raving experience, and their leader Goldie, of course, is featured heavily because for a couple of years you were their official photographer. What was that like, documenting such a major part of the jungle and drum and bass movement? And did you feel like it was a major part of the jungle and drum and bass movement at the time, or is it only in retrospect?
No, I felt like it was special, really, really special. I'd been documenting raves up until the point of you know, different raves, Thunder and Joy, different promoters, Laser Drum and so on, just to get my head around how to photograph in the raves. And then when Goldie came along and asked me to sort of document this club and this vision that he had, I felt like, yes, this was a chance for me to be a true photographer, be a completist about this, go there every week with rolls of film and shoot and document everything, every last aspect of it. So it gave me a real project, you know, and as a photographer, we love projects. We love to sort of like go in down a rabbit hole and every week in, week out, experience the same thing over and over again, just to get it on film, just to sort of capture the experience. And that was a real honor for me. And at the time I was studying at London College of Printing, studying photography. Eventually the Metalheads work that I'd done became my end of year exhibition, of which the prints were then, I gave the prints to Goldie as a thank you for allowing me to sort of come in every week and paying me to come in every week. And I would shoot on the Sunday, process the film on the Monday, and see him on Tuesday evening and share the work with him and watch him cry sometimes, because there were such amazing moments that he would have missed, if you know what I mean. It's his club, but there's so much he doesn't see. So that was a really beautiful thing. And to have him as a leader as well, his passion, his energy, his desire to see good and to sort of capture creativity. The only thing that was difficult, because I think at the time he was going out with Bjork, and she would never want her picture taken. She would just never want her picture taken. I'll try and sneak up on her and get a picture. Nope, it wasn't going to happen. So I think I missed out on that moment. I think I missed out on David Bowie as well, raving in there as well. I don't know why. Everyone's like, did you see Bowie? I was like, what? Where?
That's annoying.
Yeah,
So Goldie is like quite clearly an interesting character, and
yeah,
he
absolutely.
does stand out among the 90s rave scene as being one of those larger than life characters. And I imagine that's probably partly why he's gone on to such great success in other fields since, including Strictly Come Dancing, of course. Who else stood out for you as a photographer?
I mean, they were all such great personalities, you know, whether it's sort of like the working class hero of DJ Hype to the true artisan of Goldie, because we all knew Goldie before the scene was even there, because he came from graffiti. He was already embedded in underground cultures. And there's seminal things he did. That's why we spoke about Terminator in there, the track that he made, because it was a seminal change in the sound, as it were, in the dark core era when he went from happy to dark. But I would say for all of them, whether it's the Bristol crowd, the Crust, Ronnie Size, just because they all had visions. You know, these people were visionary people. They saw something in the scene that they wanted to emulate from other cultures, whether it's dancehall, sound system culture, or, you know, jazz, in the case of Ronnie Size, to your Dillingers and your Lemon D's, who were like the children of sound men. So they understood sound in a very different way. Each and every one of them were like huge personalities, always drove huge cars, always lived really well and dressed really well. You know, they literally lived in the moment, and you had to admire that, you know, because it was such an inspiration to see, you know, working class people making money through making music, which then they'll have in the boot of their car, which then they'll drive around all the record shops, and they could sell 30,000 records at the back of a car, which would give you a nice earner. You know, if every record was like $3.49, maybe you made £2 in every record, you made 60,000.
Wow, yeah.
On one good release. You know, that was the sort of lottery moment for all of us. Like, we just wanted to make that one great record, at least, just so we could live for a year, and then maybe off the back of it DJ, maybe off the back of it, you know, have a nice deal, maybe off the back of it hang out with some great people and make more tunes. You know, it's the sort of dream and the vision. But I think everyone stood out, because I think fundamentally everyone who was a part of the scene couldn't be anything else. DJ Hype can't be anything but DJ Hype. All the MCs can't be anything else. They can't. I mean, they can work in the post office, but they'll still be making mixtapes while they're there. You know, it's just part of their wiring. So that was always a wonderful thing to see and be inspired by. But Goldie was very much a very different character, because he is a lot more than just one thing. He's multifaceted. I think the last time I spoke to him, which was when we did the interview for the book, he mentioned that he might have two brains in his head. So because some people, you know, you've got the left and right side of the brain, and in theory, they coordinate to sort of run your whole body. But for some people, they don't coordinate. They're two different people in there. You only work that out by doing a test where you cover one eye and say, what color is that? And they cover the other eye and go, what color is that? If they're two different colors, it's because the two different brains don't see the same thing.
Interesting. You've also captured rappers such as Biggie Smalls, the Wu-Tang Clan, which that must have been fantastic to go and work with those guys. And that's just to name two acts. How similar or different were jungle artists to rappers?
They were very different. They were very different. Junglists are not the same as rappers. There are crossovers. There's the same sort of shared values and the same cultural sort of like cues. But rappers they're more like comic book characters. They're more like the comic book heroes. You know, they stand up, they can wear a cape, they can save cats out of trees. You know, they can do anything. And they portray themselves as people who can do anything, who have sort of like superhuman skills, you know, superhuman verbal skills. But I found like the junglists were more like evil villains. They were more like the sort of quiet sort of henchmen in the back, just, I'll get mine one day. And they were more like, because they spent too many times in the studio with those machines. And a lot of the time you see these drum and bass producers, you go to their studios and you see that they just basically stay up all night torturing machines, like pushing these machines to their nth degree. So it kind of felt like the difference between Dr. Doom and, you know, Superman. And most drum and bass people were more Doom, like all winter in the studio, all summer. Maybe you come out in spring for the Winter Music Fest to go off to Miami, catch a tan, maybe hydroponics, blah. And then hopefully you try and make sure you got a summer hit, so you playing all the raves over summer to then go back in the studio in winter to start the whole process again. So the drum and bass heads were very much a different kettle of fish, but that was kind of what was beautiful for me, because I could hang out with rappers and engage with that exuberant personalities and try and catch that on film, to then hang out with drum and bass producers for like hours at a time, not saying a word because it's just the music, and then ask them to step outside while I catch a shot, or while they're sort of in the breaks, I'll then get the pictures or the portraits of them because I just wanted to contextualize who they were. And they may have gone, all right, I might need a press shot because I'm DJing next week in Berlin or something. And I'm like, right, fine, fair trade. Let's do that. But yeah, very different personalities.
I wonder if it's partly as well because they're American versus British, and Americans are a bit more showy, I suppose. Yeah. But also, rap is a show-offy thing, and producing is a bit of a nerdy thing a lot of the time, isn't it?
Exactly.
Nobody is raving now, clearly, and it's impacting on so many of us in so many different ways. Is this why you think we're also captivated by books like yours, podcasts like these?
Yeah, I think so. I think now of all times, we're starting to really value what dance is to our humanity, what it does for us, to basically move your body around and turn your brain off. Like, literally turn that brain off. I think many of the anxieties that everyone's suffering from, certainly in the last year, has come from overthinking and not having that time to sort of turn the brain off. And unfortunately, drugs and alcohol doesn't do it well. It does it really badly. It just suppresses. So you kind of have to do that through moving your body around. And once your body starts to do its thing, your brain goes, I'm going to chill now because I don't need to do anything. You can just dance for an hour. And that kind of helps us feel better, become better. And I kind of wanted the books to drop now just to remind us that when we do get back out there, let's value what dancing is and let's really enjoy dancing all night long safely. Like the music's nice, the sound systems are great, the venues are clean, we're not all sort of on top of each other. And I noticed it a few years ago when I started sort of raving with the youngers again. Like, I've got a 21-year-old daughter, so I started going out with them. And I realized that I'd go to these clubs where the young people playing their music, and there was no space. They almost wanted to touch each other. They almost wanted to be in a mosh pit, bouncing together. And it goes off even more now than it did when we were younger. Because, yeah, we had foghorns and things, but we kind of wanted our own space. Now no one wants space because we're so sort of split apart. We're so atomized. We're no longer a sort of compound group of people that once we do get together, all we want to do is just be in that warmth and pogoing with other people, all strangers and everything, but just to feel bodies around you, like in a beautiful, safe way. And then you can go to the chill out room and pass out when you're ready. Like you've lived. You can wake up the next day knowing that, oh, I've shaken those bones. And now I still rave. I kind of, because of my age and everything else, I found myself going to more gay clubs lately. Like in the last 3 years, I'd go to Horse Meat Disco a lot, to be honest with you, and Body and Soul in New York. Because the spirit of the music is still there, but at least even there's more space. You can sort of find a corner, hear your music, have a sip of your whiskey and be nice, because I'm at that age. I'd like my rum on the rocks, please. No Coke, thank you. I don't need the fire.
I mean, I think that if people don't like spacing, they're going to not like the next few years, I've got to say.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm interested in how you view jungle and drum and bass and how it's changed musically and atmospherically in terms of the clubbing experience from then to now, and whether it's better or worse.
I don't know if it's better or worse, but it's certainly different, and certainly different in this country. What I think is the best thing that we've done is that we've exported our rave culture abroad. So although we don't have the raves that we had like we did in the 90s, when you go abroad, it feels like the 90s because they're sort of playing catch up with some of the things that we did, or they're discovering that a great sound system in a warehouse without toilets or whatever, without alcohol, is actually a good night out. It's a great night out. So we've had a bit of that, but I would say it's neither better nor worse. I just think the experience changes to suit different legalities and different places that you're in. That's fine. The spirit doesn't change. You find the spirit of the music in different musics. You just have to sort of make time for it. And as I said, if you want to go back in time to that 90s experience, you may have to travel abroad. You may have to go to a more slightly naive country.
I actually do think that there is an equivalence. And to be honest, it's anyone who's watched this knows that I wasn't raving in the 90s. So actually, you could say, what do I know? But from what I hear and what I feel and what from what people tell me, I wonder whether there is actually something around the techno scene now. And obviously the non-raving, but prior to lockdown, I was finding that there was a real there's like a dark energy to the, and it could be Sunday night like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and everyone's just like heads down, techno music. And I wonder, given what you've just said, is because all of the people out on a Sunday night, they seem to be foreign. You're in these clubs in London and everyone's from Italy or from whatever. And there's that spirit. And I wonder if that's something maybe that Britain or British people have perhaps lost a little bit. I have no idea why. And it's literally just something that's come to me with you saying that.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the strange thing is, it's a bit like football hooliganism. We're not the same football hooligans we were in the 80s, but the Russians still look to us and go, oh my God, you guys set the standard. And it's the same thing with you see all the psytrance stuff. You see all these sort of like, definitely Italian crusties coming out and raving hard daytime ravers, hard ravers. And you're like, wow. And you speak to them and they're like, yeah, I came here because of rave. I came here because of what you guys did. And I'm like, that's really cool, but we don't really do it anymore. But I'm glad you found it and good luck to you. And I'm it's nothing like having a trust fund to dance all day long in the noughties. But you're right, there is an equivalence. And I think that's the thing I think I would like everyone to experience. But that said, talking to someone recently, when I went to Andy C recently, or last year, 2 years ago, did an event at Wembley Arena, the first time Wembley Arena went all night. And she spoke about how it brought her back to drum and bass, how the spirit of the rave came back to her. And that's like a wonderful thing, because Andy C is the few acts that Wembley would go, yeah, okay, you're good. But that takes 25 years of being Andy C, being the best DJ.
My biggest question about that is, when did he go for a piss?
That's a very good point.
Did he just put on like one of those really sort of really long crust tunes that go on for like 16 minutes? And he's like, in fact, while I'm here, I'll do a shit as well,
Yeah, exactly. Get that out of my system. I mean, Andy C and his 3-deck mixing, it's kind of like, he has the capacity to at least, create the 15 long mix, have 3 tunes playing back to back with each drop working in sequence with the other. It's like, I mean, genius level mixing, as a DJ, the double drop and all the little technical things that DMB seems to pride itself on, Andy C has perfected. And including maybe the toilet break tune.
I wonder how many toilet break tunes you need in an 8-hour set. Anyway, we digress. Before we wrap this up, finally, if we could ask you, why should people buy your fantastic new book, Who Say Reload, which is out now on Velocity Press?
I think it's one of those wonderful books that if you have on your coffee table will sort of pique the interest of any individual that would otherwise be roaming through your home going, oh, I see you're a raver. And then
presenteeism is the reason you're saying to buy the book, rather than actually being into it or it being an amazing book. Just showing off. That's basically
this is it. I mean, we're human. We like beautiful things. Let's just have a few pictures. Oh, let me turn it. Oh, look, and this is my mate Johnny when he still had hair. Boom. Because we did have hair and we were like beautiful, and we still are. But you know what I mean.
Mate, you've got loads of hair. What are you talking about?
Oh, mate, this is lockdown. This is what lockdown does to you. You grow a beard for the first time.
You've got a fantastic set of dreads on you that you've been playing with for the whole interview. What are you talking about? You've got loads of hair, mate.
Yeah, it covers the bald patch that's there.
Right, there we go.
It's a wonderful. I mean, who knew, right? Like looking back on what your younger self did and be like, oh, well done, kid.
Oh man, I went through Facebook yesterday, looking back about 15 years. I was like, that was a bad idea. What a depressing thing that was. Well, listen, Eddie Utchair, it's been fantastic to talk to you. Your book, Who Say Reload, with your photography, is out now on Velocity Press, and so people should go and get it. It's wicked. And thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Really appreciate your time, and thank you, Raw, and thank you to the rave community. Let's hopefully be out there dancing again.
Well, that's it from another episode of Raw. We hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed making it. We're now on all video platforms, so if you're listening on audio, please do check out our YouTube page for this episode filmed, plus loads more besides. And you can also find us on Facebook, Insta and Twitter. Just search for Raw, the 90s Rave Podcast. Plus, if you can spare just a few quid to help us continue making more great 90s rave content and hopefully keeping a smile on your face at a difficult time, you can do so at gofundme.com/the 90s 90s Rave podcast. All donations will be ploughed back into the podcast, including expenses to get around the country interviewing some of your rave favourites and also improving our equipment.
X amount of pressure, X amount of raw.